5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to Singapore. The 4.9-kilometre Marina Bay Street Circuit is our location for all the action this weekend, and we are gearing up for the first practice session, FP1, coming your way very shortly. I'm Rosanna Tennant down here in the pit lane. We've got a red light at the moment, but we're going to get a green light soon, and then the cars will take to this iconic track. The FP1 session is a tricky one because it's not very representative. It is very hot and humid here in Singapore, but of course we race under the lights here. So it's an interesting first session for the drivers to get to grips with. They're going to be exploring the circuit, the new tarmac that's been laid, so there's going to be plenty to talk about over the next hour. Joining me in the commentary box is our lead commentator, Harry Benjamin, and former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley. Harry, we're back in Singapore. It feels like only yesterday that we were racing here in 2023. That was an exciting race. It was Carlos Sainz and the Ferrari who won out then. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting a feeling that Ferrari are the favourites coming into this weekend. But we have McLaren at the top of the constructors standing. So there's plenty going on, isn't there, in Formula One at the moment?
There certainly is. I mean, at the start of this season, we're all kind of bracing ourselves, weren't we? Longest season ever. We all thought it was going to feel long as well, because after Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, it was very much looking like it was going to be another Max Verstappen and Red Bull season. How the tables turn in Formula One, and we come into every weekend genuinely not quite knowing how it's going to pan out. A little bit more of an indication here, as you suggest, because we believe Ferrari will be strong based on the history here as well from last year, with Charles Leclerc going well, but Carlos Sainz with a magnificent display from pole to the win, keeping Lando Norris within his DRS as a way of defending against the chasing Mercedes of George Russell as well. So how well can Mercedes do here? But you know what, this weekend is going to be crucial, because the championship fight is still a championship fight between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. The gap is 59 points. However, Lando Norris needs, in my opinion, to win this weekend. He needs to take big chunks out of Red Bull and Verstappen, and this is the place to do it, because we believe that this is not a Red Bull track. It's too bumpy. The Red Bull doesn't ride curves very well, so that's maybe how the form book is looking ahead of this weekend.
Yeah, plenty to keep an eye on. This track is so tricky to get right, Mark. You've worked in the garage at McLaren. How difficult is it to get a fast lap done here in terms of traffic management? And of course, these conditions make it so difficult, not just for the drivers, but I imagine as a mechanic, you were sweating a little bit back in the day as well.
Yeah, it's a unique race, this one. I remember going there back in 2008 for the very first event, and it was kind of surreal being there, you know, the first time we'd ever raced under the lights, and it just brings another element to it. From a fan's point of view, it's fantastic, but you're right, it poses a number of different challenges for the teams and drivers. The traffic management definitely one, the heat and humidity another. I think when we get into being on track over the course of the rest of today, there's going to be a lot of building the drivers' confidence up, like we often see at places like Monaco. The fastest laps around here come from the drivers that have a clean weekend, a smooth weekend, where gradually you're building away at confidence, hopefully peaking at exactly the right time when it really matters on a Saturday afternoon for qualifying.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes still until we get a green light at the end of the pit lane, and McLaren are going to be thankful for that. Yes, they're leading the Constructors' Championship. Yes, they were the winners last time out. Oscar Piastri putting in a superb performance in Baku for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, taking the win there. But all eyes are on them for a different reason right now. I'm standing outside the McLaren garage, and I have been for quite some time, because there's been a bit of a problem with the back of Oscar Piastri's McLaren. During this morning's pit stop practice, they encountered an issue on the rear left corner of his car, and they've been currently replacing it. And this isn't an issue that they say they've seen before, so they wanted to assess the issue fully to ensure that they have no further issues this weekend. And while I've been watching, one of the tyres had got stuck on the wheel of Oscar's car. The mechanics were desperately trying to get it off. Finally they did, after a lot of trying. Big cheer went up in the garage, bit of laughter between the mechanics. But the floor is now being put back on. The front wing and front end of the car is off the car. It's currently just on a stand in front of me, and the mechanics are working hard to get the car ready. They say they hope he'll be out before the end of FP1. What is going on, guys? You couldn't make this up if you tried. And here we go. We've got a car now heading out to the end of the pit lane. Just had George Russell pass me in the Mercedes, and we've got a couple of other cars queuing at the end too. But this is tricky. We're talking about confidence levels, Mark. We've got an issue already for Oscar Piastri and the McLaren team.
It's not the ideal start to their morning, but as you said earlier on, this isn't the most valuable session. They will, of course, all get out there because there's always something to learn as the green light comes on at the end of the pit lane. But it's not the most representative in that the rest of the important sessions in the weekend will be done in the deep of night under those lights, as you said, where temperatures are different. The track environment is all completely different and the car behaves in a different way. So there's still stuff to be learned here, and the cars will be heading out now as they do so to learn all sorts of things. They've been stripped and rebuilt, of course, since last time out. Only a week ago we were racing in Baku, so there is lots to learn, and I think we're going to see plenty of action on track this morning still.
Yeah, lots of cars heading out. Another one going past me there, the Ferrari, with a lot of Flovirs on the back of it. They've brought some upgrades this weekend. Harry, we've got a green light at the end of the pit lane. Lots of cars getting ready, and Alpine getting stuck, actually. Sorry, it's so loud. I think I also just spoke over some radio. Sorry about that. We've got photographers being pushed out of the way of Lance Stroll as he tries to leave his garage. It's absolute chaos down here, Harry. I'm going to send it up to you in the commentary box.
Thanks, Rosanna. Well, I do have one crucial question for you, though, before you do leave us, if that's possible. For those who listen to the Checkered Flag podcast previewing this weekend, it's something for you to do between FP1 and FP2. But at the end, Rosanna, you said you were going to go off to the gym. I just wondered if you actually did that.
I'd already put a session in earlier on in the day, Harry, so a double gym session is a bit too much for me in Singapore.
Oh, fair. Okay, yeah. No, understandable.
And I was on the bike this morning. I was on the bike this morning as well, so,
you're better than I.
Giving a good shot.
You are better than I. Well done.
Not at all.
Thanks, Rosanna. We'll check back in with you shortly. And you mentioned a little issue with the Alpine. We're just seeing a replay out of it, actually. Pierre Gasly coming out into the fast lane of the pit lane. And, the turning lock and the angle wasn't quite right. Nearly went into the wall, Mark. Had to get a little bit of a pushback.
That's right, yeah. First experience of the weekend. I'm sure it won't happen again, but yeah, he just got his angles slightly wrong. Misjudged it a little bit. Nothing serious, no damage, and on they go.
FP1 is underway then, and for those who wish to do a sync up, it's 57 minutes and 52, 51, 50 seconds remain. Now, it is a night race, but FP1 is probably the most irrelevant part of the weekend because, FP1 in any weekend is always a building session anyway. The track evolves, but particularly so here. But it's still daylight.
Yeah, so completely different, as you said, completely different to all of the sessions that are really going to matter, and that's where it becomes a little less relevant. But like I said, there's always something to learn, and track time is so valuable in Formula One these days. We don't have the endless testing we used to have years ago, so the race weekends are pretty much the only opportunity to get an actual car on an actual racetrack and learn something. So we're going to see a lot of cars with the big aero rakes on the back of them, measuring data. There's Flovirs all over the back of some of these cars that I can see rolling out the pits now. So the engineers and the aerodynamicists are always looking to get a car onto a racetrack because there is so much valuable data to collect and learn from it. That's exactly what will be happening. So less representative in terms of overall lap times. Let's not read too much into that, but lots to be learned that will be valuable to them over the weekend.
Yeah, just over 4.9 kilometres. That's just over 3 miles. 12 corners to the left, 7 to the right. And, if you remember last year, there were a couple of changes made to this circuit to accommodate some of the building work that was happening in the area. They actually got rid of a couple of corners and sort of introduced a straight with a bit of a curve between turns 14 all the way through to 16. That remains with a slight left-hand kink at 15, and that's about a 400-metre long straight. And that is also the site of a new DRS zone. So we will have 4 drag reduction system zones around this circuit for the weekend. Last year we only had 3. So we'll see what that does for overtaking as well, because it is a street circuit, and unlike Baku though, it's a lot tighter and twistier and shorter, so it is more difficult to overtake. The sound of Charles Leclerc is what you can hear right now, just making his way to finish off a lap. Round the final 2 corners, the double left-handers that seal off a lap, and he goes second fastest with a 1:37.8 behind George Russell, and Lewis Hamilton just goes to the top of the times, a 1:36.1. In terms of tyres, we have got once again the softest in the range, the C3 hard, the C4 medium and the C5 soft. Everybody out there at the moment is either on a medium or the top 3 runners on a hard tyre at the moment.
I think what's most interesting, or certainly in fact there's loads of interesting stuff about Formula One right now. It's in such a great place, isn't it? But I think one of the biggest points of interest, and it's coming into most weekends, but it seems to be ramping up more and more. We genuinely have no idea who's going to be a favourite here. And I say that, I think, honestly, for the first time in about 3 or 4 races where, and this might sound crazy, I even think Red Bull could be in contention here. Traditionally, it's been a terrible circuit for them. But what we did see in Baku, although certainly not in the hands of Max Verstappen, and there are a number of reasons for that. I think they made some disastrous setup choices over the weekend that sent Max in a very different direction to Checo, and in the race it massively hampered the performance of his car. But in the hands of Checo, that Red Bull was as quick as pretty much anything out there. If you speak to Red Bull, they think they could have won that race had a couple of moments gone differently for them with Checo. So if they're able to, overcome some of these balance issues that Max has been struggling so much with and bring that here, and I do caveat all of that with the fact that it is a bumpy circuit, but, to some extent so is Baku, I wonder if they have turned some kind of corner. There seems to be another upgrade coming for Austin, which they're pinning quite a lot of hopes on at Red Bull, but I wonder if they could have a better showing here. And if that were the case, I wouldn't want to pick between any of the top 4 teams as having a good weekend here, because it's so dependent on your driver being in the right headspace, the right confidence level. Yes, you've got to have a car, but if you build up your weekend, as I said earlier on, getting those confidence levels to allow you to push so close to the barriers, anyone could come out on top.
I think you might be the only person in the world this week that hasn't written off Red Bull for this weekend. I respect it.
I might change my mind at the end of today, totally, when they're floundering in 10th. But
I mean, you're absolutely right, though. We generally cannot right now predict how it's going to go. I think what we can say, though, we're looking at this championship battle. It's game on in the constructors. It's a 3-way fight. McLaren currently lead the way, 20 points ahead of Red Bull, and Red Bull, then it's only another 31 points back to Ferrari. So it is McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, and at the moment, in terms of points scored over the last 4 races, McLaren have taken the most at 138. Then it's Ferrari with 103. Red Bull have only scored 67 points in the last 4 races. So it is certainly on the back foot when you look at the numbers of it. In terms of McLaren, though, we only have 1 car out there at the moment in the form of Lando Norris because of some issues with Oscar Piastri's car. Rosanna, what more can you tell us?
It's looking a bit more positive, Harry, that's what I can tell you. The car has just been lowered down off the jacks. It's got tyres on it. They're in tyre blankets, of course. The front wing is just being attached now to mechanics, gingerly moving it forward, and it's being wrenched back onto the main sort of hub of the car. And Oscar Piastri is in the garage. He's just put his balaclava on, was sorting out his drinks tube and his radio with his overalls. Overalls now being pulled up over his shoulders, and he's going to zip himself in, and then I'm sure the helmet will go on. So McLaren were painting a bit of a bleak picture, weren't they, with their communications at the start of the session, saying they hope they get him out by the end of FP1, but this is looking pretty positive. We're only a few minutes in, and already it looks like the second McLaren is going to take part in the session. Great news for Oscar Piastri. You need confidence around this track, and he needs as much time out there to get up to speed with what is coming his way this weekend.
Absolutely, thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, for a man that is, still improving, Tom Stallard, his engineer, still sort of alluding to his rate of improvement. Oscar Piastri is still not levelling off at the moment, so it's a bit ominous for the rest of the field, and indeed his teammate Lando Norris. How do you think that's going to play out, though, for the rest of the year? Because there was so much talk, wasn't there? Team orders, tyre rules, whatever you want to call it, ahead of Baku. And in the end, well, it was the opposite way, because Norris wasn't in the hunt, really, and did a great job of holding up Perez for Piastri. But what happens here?
Look, I think at the moment, I still think Lando is a slightly quicker driver. I think if you look back at the actual numbers over this season, that's the picture that it paints. The problem with Lando is, or one of his problems recently, is he's not been able to maximise everything on a consistent level. He's had a couple of those dodgy starts or opening laps where it hasn't quite worked out, or he's lost positions. Whereas if you think about Oscar Piastri, he's been much more consistent on that basis. He hasn't maybe had the outright pace, particularly on a Saturday up against Lando, but he is consistent about how he delivers over a race weekend. So as his experience builds, he will only get faster and faster, I'm sure. He's going to be a threat to Lando. I think for this season, they are going to start throwing their weight behind Lando, and if there's ever an opportunity, as the man of the moment, Lando goes top of the timesheets, half a second quicker than Verstappen, if there's an opportunity this weekend and beyond for the rest of this season to favour Lando Norris in one of these sort of 50-50 type decisions, or if Oscar's able to help him in a race scenario, I think they'll take it. They've already said they'll take it, because they've got to throw their weight behind the man that has the biggest opportunity to win a championship. And that opportunity is real, but it needs Lando Norris, as you said earlier on, to start taking big chunks out of Max Verstappen, and needs to start doing it here.
Yeah, I think it cannot be understated how important a weekend this is for the Drivers' Championship. I think if we're really going to start looking at that, this 59 points is still an awful big gap. And at a track where, well, if you are anybody but Mark Priestley, Red Bull might not go very well at, and believe that, this is the place to try and take many points away from them.
It is a huge opportunity, and if you do look at the recent form book, of course McLaren have all the momentum. They've literally got a faster car. Red Bull are struggling at times to even be the third quickest car. But what we have also seen this season more than any other is the picture can change so quickly. And if Red Bull were able to bring an upgrade, say to Austin, which I think they're going to do, and if it does deliver the kind of things they're hoping it will, the picture could quite easily switch around again. So even though we've got such a dominant, I can say it's a dominant car over Red Bull by McLaren right now, that's not necessarily the way it will stay for the remainder of the championship. So whilst McLaren and Lando have an opportunity, and this race weekend could be one of the big ones, they do need to maximise it. They've left a few points on the table, haven't they, over the last 6 months or so. They can't afford to keep doing that, because Red Bull, I'm sure, won't just be sitting there taking this for the rest of the season. They'll be trying to fight back, and if they bring something that puts them back into that lead picture, it becomes all the more difficult for McLaren to maximise.
Well, if you're just joining us, we're just over 10 minutes into the first practice session for the Singapore Grand Prix. That was the voice of the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. Lando Norris is currently fastest with a 1:33.9 on the medium tyre, half a second clear of Verstappen. Sainz is third, Tsunoda fourth, Hamilton is the top five, only about 5 or 6 laps on the board at the moment. Down for us as well in the pit lane, it's Rosanna Tennant.
Yes, I am down in the pit lane, and Oscar Piastri is no longer in the pit lane, Harry. He's just headed out on track. Everybody was gathered around the McLaren garage watching him get into the car. Very nice reflective helmet he's got this weekend. Of course, under the lights, you like to twinkle. He is the latest Formula One star, of course. And while he was getting ready to go out, Carlos Sainz and the Ferrari came in and out. They took off the front wing that he'd been running, and they just put on a new one straight away, and he's gone back out. So, Mark, that's back-to-back testing, isn't it, of these upgrades that they're bringing to the circuit this weekend?
Yeah, exactly. Ferrari have got quite a few upgrades, actually. I think a new floor on the car as well, which is significant. So they are doing back-to-back, and that's why this session is valuable. Like I said earlier on, it may not be about ultimate lap times, and it may not be representative in that sense, but they can get a good aero balance of the car. They can send the car with sensors and data and FlowViz all over it that's collecting data and literally comparing the effects and the feedback from one particular setup or a front wing to another. So that is, I imagine, what they're doing right now.
Charles Leclerc just popped up to second, by the way, ahead of Lance Stroll. Nico Hülkenberg just seeing a little replay of the Haas driver locking up, coming through at turns 16 and 17, managing to keep it on the track. Indeed, George Russell is also pushing quite hard out there in the Mercedes, finding the limits early doors. Rosanna, we've had a question come in on hashtag BBC F1, just asking about the weather and our predictions at the moment. And, well, you're outside at the moment, so I'm wondering what the clouds are saying. If there are any. It's
quite nice. Yeah, no, there are quite a lot of clouds. It's a little bit murky if I look to my left down the pit lane towards pit exit. And then if I look to my right, actually, there's blue sky. But it's so weird here. I must confess, I was doing a little sunbathing this morning whilst revising and getting ready for this afternoon's sessions. The clouds come and go, and when the sun comes out, it's blisteringly hot. But it's winding down now. The sun's starting to set. We're moving into the evening. The lights are coming on. And it's still hot, but it's not as intense because the sun isn't shining that much. So, yeah, what would I say? It's sort of muggy. That's what we'd say in England, I think, muggy. But no threatening clouds. We had a couple of spots of rain earlier this morning, just a few, but nothing to write home about. Didn't put it on my postcard.
No, not quite. Rosanna Tennant working hard and playing harder, as always. Indeed, the official stats from the FIA ahead of this session said there was a 10% chance of rain, and we could well see some quite heavy showers across the weekend, but the weather conditions are quite changeable across the weekend here in Singapore, so that could be something to watch out for at the moment. Carlos Sainz is on a quick lap at the moment on the hard tyre, fastest of anybody through the first sector, just making his way through over the Anderson Bridge into the left-hander of turn 13, down Esplanade Drive before you brake for the right-hander of turn 14. And this is the new straight that was introduced last year, around about 400 metres, a slight kink through the left-hander of 15. It's also the site of the new DRS zone, which opens and then slams shut for Carlos Sainz. He brakes for the right-hander of 16, then the left-hander of 17, which brings you out the pit lane entry. You stave off to your left. Sainz stays out and takes the double left-hander that finishes off a lap and goes third fastest in his Ferrari. Nearly 9/10 back from Lando Norris, who is still the quickest man out there at the moment. A 1:33.199 as Sergio Perez locks up, can't get it turned in and has to go deep, and does have to say a very neat and tidy 360, and that's down at turn 16, so he's just gone straight on, and it's just feeding into the path of Oscar Piastri, who is now back out on track after his early issues which prevented him from getting out in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, and what we just saw there was Perez, coming out from his little pirouette in the escape road right into the line of fire of Oscar Piastri. It's a real challenge, as it is with lots of street circuits, of managing your position on track. The sort of engineers at Red Bull really ought to have been on the radio to Sergio Perez there, telling him who's coming, and not just who's coming, but who's on a flying lap, who's on a slow down lap, who's on a prep lap. Those things all matter to a driver. It's the information they need to know so that they can carefully manage where and when they position themselves back out on the circuit. So he'll maybe get a little ticking off for that. I don't think anything too serious, but further on in the weekend, that could have really hampered a lap.
Great weekend for Sergio Perez in Baku, up until the penultimate lap.
Yes.
But it was nice to see, wasn't it? And I have to say, I felt for Perez in the incident. I also felt for Sainz. I think you guys called it as a bit of a racing incident. So did I. Perhaps maybe Perez had more room on his left. Sainz came over slightly. It felt like it was a bit of an unnecessary. They both could have had a podium at the end of the day. Yeah. However, was that for Perez's form? Do you think a Baku one-off? We know he's a bit of a maestro around there. Or are we actually seeing that the bigger problems for Red Bull are the car, and actually Perez and his struggles have been more clear to see over the last few months, because perhaps that's where the driver does make the difference. Verstappen has been able to work around problems with the car, and Perez has been feeling it more, and now Verstappen's starting to feel those problems. Where are we sitting with Perez and I suppose his future?
Yeah, it's quite first of all, I was also really pleased to see him have a good weekend. I think most of Formula One was really pleased to finally see him get some positive feedback and press. But I think it's maybe highlighted an issue that Red Bull have here, in that you could argue that they've got two drivers. They're both talented drivers, one extremely so, one of the all-time greats in Verstappen. But is it a picture that we're seeing where they have two drivers that have quite different driving styles, and therefore to create a car that works for both of them might be really quite tricky? So over the last few years, we've seen a car very much tailored towards Max Verstappen. He's been very capable in driving that and getting the best out of it. But conversely, Perez, in recent times particularly, has struggled to get anywhere near him. You know, he hasn't been able to match his driving to the characteristics of that car. And as the car has shifted in recent times, because they've had a few upgrades that either haven't worked as they hoped or have shifted the balance of the car. We've heard Max Verstappen complaining about a rear end that seems unstable, which is not what he likes. Maybe that balance shift or that changing characteristic in recent times has moved back towards, where Checo Perez operates. The bigger problem with that is you can't have both. So if a driver can't adapt in the way that we would like them to, or a team would like them to, I guess ideally what you want is a driver or two drivers that have a similar driving style, so you tailor one car and it suits them both. Obviously, when you've got a Max Verstappen that's winning everything, your second driver is just collateral damage, and you kind of don't worry too much about it. But we're no longer in that utterly dominant phase they were in. We're maybe now seeing a little bit of a sign towards that. So has Max got to adapt to the way the car has shifted now? I'm sure they'll be desperately trying to shift the car back into his favour. But in this period that it's in right now, it seems that Checo, certainly in Baku, was particularly happy. Today, this weekend, is going to be really interesting, isn't it, to see if that form continues.
It certainly will be. We think with the curbs and the bumpiness and Red Bull's issues with curb riding, they will struggle around here. Also, Christian Horner has come out ahead of today saying that perhaps some of the issues are down to correlation issues between their wind tunnel and the data with the CFD not quite displaying accurately as it should be. So clearly they are slightly scratching their heads and looking at things. And I think it's also evidenced by they've had a bit of a team reshuffle in the last week, announcing Gianpiero Lambiase, who is currently Max's race engineer. He will still remain as their race engineer, but he now becomes head of racing. They've also got a new head of sporting regulations, a head of racing operations, a head of logistics as well. And this is all in the wake, I suppose, of Jonathan Wheatley leaving the team, where he will be the Sauber Audi team principal when he's allowed back from his gardening leave.
It does feel like a lot is changing at Red Bull generally, doesn't it? Not just in terms of their performance on track, but behind the scenes, things shifting around. They are, this typically happens in Formula One. You go through a really dominant cycle. You can go back over many, many years and see this happening.
We were going to hear some radio. It's Valtteri Bottas, who was trying to start a lap, but he got blocked by Williams in front of him, so he's had to abandon his lap there.
Yeah, if you go back over decades, you can see these cyclic periods of one team dominating in Formula One, and then gradually that period comes to an end, and then typically off the back of that, you have a bit of a restructuring or a reorganisation. People move on, new people come in. You have to sort of rebuild again, and it feels a little bit. I don't want to call this too early, because let's not forget, Max Verstappen was utterly dominant at the start of this very season. I don't want to write them off just yet, but this sort of shifting and reorganising and reshuffling kind of is typical to a period of dominance coming to an end. So I wonder if the two might be going hand in hand. We'll have to see. The one other point on Checo and Red Bull is that Checo has obviously been complaining about his car and his struggles for a long, long time. One thing that came out over the course of the build-up to this weekend was that Christian Horner almost accepting that some of the problems that Max is now experiencing, Checo was talking about quite some time ago, and maybe they didn't take it seriously enough back then. It was almost an apology to Checo. Maybe they didn't take his feedback seriously enough because Max was still winning at the time. But actually those problems, pretty similar ones, have now shown up on the other side of the garage, and they're having to take it seriously all of a sudden.
It is such an interesting dynamic, isn't it? 38 minutes and 3, 2, 1 second remain of free practice 1 for the Singapore Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc is currently fastest ahead of Lando Norris. Carlos Sainz is third, Alex Albon fourth, and George Russell in the Mercedes the top 5. Most of the drivers in the pits, a few cars still out on track though, but let's take the time to head back down to Rosanna.
Two of the cars that are in the pits are the Red Bulls, both Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen in the garage, although it looks like Verstappen's going to be heading out fairly shortly. The mechanics are all standing around their respective wheels and tyres, just waiting for the signal from their chief mechanic. And we know that Max Verstappen's been complaining of late about the car. You've just been talking about it then. He's been complaining already in this session of having understeer, and also that the tyres are overheating throughout the lap. It's such a difficult lap to prepare your tyres for. You don't want the performance at the front end of the lap. You need to spread it, of course, across the whole 4.9 kilometres. And this track is ramping. I've just been listening to George Russell's radio in the Mercedes team, and he's saying the track's really ramping. What do you want to do about the programme, is what he asked the team and his engineer, Marcus Dudley. But what can the teams do? Because I imagine you sit in your engineering briefing ahead of the sessions, you work out what you want to do, how you're going to do it. But if the track is ramping, and by that he means evolving, because it's obviously a street track, it's very green, slippery when we come here first thing in the weekend. We've had a couple of sort of practice sessions for other support series, but it's going to ramp up with these F1 cars. So can they change their programme? Can they change the timetable, or is it better to stick to what you planned at the beginning?
No, they can absolutely adapt, and they will be adapting. It's the kind of the name of the game. You have to be utilising the circuit in whatever conditions it's in at any given moment. So yeah, they'll have a run plan, assuming this was going to be a very slippery session, as we said earlier on, not really representative in terms of lap times because of the temperatures, we're in the daylight, so very different to the rest of the weekend. So they would have planned things like the data collection, the aero runs, the Flowbiz runs, all these kind of things back to back, some different aero components perhaps. But if the circuit's now ramping up and becoming a little bit more grippy, perhaps a little bit more representative, you might want to start shifting that focus of your run plan more towards performance. That's the sort of thing you'd be talking about. So maybe you can start dialing in or out some of the characteristics of the car. It's still not going to be fully representative of the darkness and the later night sessions that we get as the weekend rolls on, but it might be that you can start to learn different things as the track environment changes.
Certainly so, and we're seeing cars pushing. There's still a little bit of dust and dirt offline as well. These street tracks, which are used by everyday road-going users in Singapore, closed off for the Grand Prix this weekend, and track evolution certainly high. This one of the most physical circuits for a driver, where you can lose between 3 to 5 kilos across a Grand Prix, such as the intensity and the heat. But still, more news from the pit lane, Rosanna.
I'm busy this evening, I tell you. You're putting me through my paces, Harry. Red Bull just sent Max Verstappen out, and Mercedes have just sent Lewis Hamilton out. He had to stop a little to let the Red Bull go first. But George Russell still in, and the engine cover off for George Russell. A few mechanics, quite a few actually, gathered around the rear of the Mercedes car. I don't know what I can't quite see what they're doing, but there's a bit of masking tape being put on the car. It's high tech, isn't it, this industry, Mark? So I'm not quite sure. Could it be to do with some cooling potentially, given the temperatures and the way that they've configured the cooling, the cooling configuration as such? Could it be to do with that? I'm not quite sure what they're doing at the back.
Yeah, if the engine cover's off the car, they have these louvers that you see, these little sort of bolt in and out panels that can be easily interchanged to give more or less cooling as the temperatures change over the weekend, which they will. And it's really important, you know, it's not just a sort of, an inconsequential thing, because if you don't get that measured and set correctly before qualifying, at which point the car's going to park firmly, you're kind of locked in then for the rest of the weekend. So whatever cooling configuration you have by Saturday evening or night, as it will be here, you're then fixed with that. And if you go into the race day, you have to try and predict what the temperatures are going to be, because if you get into the race day and that's wrong, you're compromised in the race itself. So that could well be what they're doing. I have no idea what the masking tape could be. That could be something completely different. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's not as high tech as it looks, Formula One, is it?
No, it isn't, is it? Rosanna, one for you, just while you're outside Mercedes and you get an up-close personal look as Lando Norris slides over the curves, coming towards turn 8, almost losing the rear, pushing hard is Norris, on the soft tyre now, fastest of anybody in the first sector, so we'll see what he's got over the line, but would have lost a little bit of time there. Just while you're outside Mercedes, though, now they've got a bit of a one-off livery this weekend, and they've added in a bit of green to celebrate one of their sponsors. My biggest worry is under the lights, they might look a bit Aston Martin.
Yeah, look, it's all for you to guess this weekend, Harry. I think you've got it down, though. I think you can tell your Lance Strolls and Fernando Alonso's from your George Russells and your Lewis Hamiltons, but you are right, that very distinctive Petronas green, they've gone with that. 50th anniversary of their sponsor, their brand, of course, and so they're dedicating their livery to that. But the engine cover's gone back on, so it looks fairly positive. A bit more masking tape. Oh, I don't need to wrap any presents this weekend or send anything. They're not going to have enough stationary supplies. But yeah, still a bit of work going on at the back of George Russell's car. He's still in the car, being cooled down nicely. Lots of pipes heading into the cockpit to try and cool down the drivers out here, because they can lose about 3 to 4 kilos during the race on Sunday. So keeping cool is imperative. We've seen in the past, haven't we, on social media, drivers getting into ice baths. Actually, I think it was last year, wasn't it? Lewis Hamilton and George Russell alongside each other in their respective ice baths, chilling, quite literally, after the session, because it is spicy for them in the cockpit. The humidity, I think, is the biggest issue. It's not just the heat, it's the humidity. And that is one of the huge challenges for them this weekend, for both them and the car, of course, too.
Not chilling out on track, though, Mark. That lap from Lando Norris, he was pushing hard.
Yeah, it was actually a scrappy lap. He's gone top of the timesheets, Lando, although let's not take too seriously the times as they are right now. He's half a second quicker than Leclerc, but he's on the soft tyre as opposed to a hard tyre run from Leclerc, and most of the other people at the top end of the timesheets at the moment, all on the hard tyre. The soft tyres are now starting to come out. The car you can hear in the background is Max Verstappen, also on a soft tyre run, but Norris was certainly pushing very, very hard, but in doing so, he overstepped that mark. It's an important part of what FP1 is all about. It's finding those limits, understanding where you can push, where you've got little scope to push further, and if you do step over that mark, you know, the walls here in Singapore are very, very close. He was well away from those just about, but he got himself onto a curb at one point, and it just sent the car in a complete tail slide. So not a clean lap, but he is top of the timesheets as things stand.
Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell all following suit and sticking on the soft tyre. Hamilton comes across the line third fastest, half a second down on Lando Norris's time. Leclerc on outlap right now. Carlos Sainz in the pit, so I wouldn't be surprised if he emerges out on the soft tyres. So yes, we are going to see a little bit of a soft tyre run as we get a look at Alex Albon, just slowly gearing up on an outlap 2, and he is indeed another one of the runners on the soft tyre. Amazing weekend in Baku for Williams, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Double points finish and a crucial time in their fight in the lower midfield. But I think a bigger result for Franco Colapinto to have been so competitive all weekend long, bounced back from his Friday practice crash. The mental resilience shown there. How impressed were you by not only Williams but Colapinto's efforts as well?
Yeah, very impressed, because, you know, even just that Baku result almost in itself justifies the decision to bring him in, doesn't it? Because he was brought in because Logan Sargent wasn't able to score points on the days when the car was capable of it. Well, Colapinto's done that. Logan Sargent was sticking it in the wall all too often, particularly at crucial times like the race itself, where of course you just don't even finish and you got no chance of scoring points. Well, he didn't do that either. He did stick it in the wall actually in Baku, but it was on the Friday. That was part of the learning experience. But then crucially after that, he knew where his limit was and he managed to be patient and consistent and stayed out the walls then. So I think that's exactly the reason that Williams brought him in, and he delivered exactly the job they needed him to. So if he can continue to do that, and he's only going to get better as the season rolls on with more and more experience, I think that puts him in a really strong position. 7th
and 8th for Williams, and Colapinto with that result in 8th becomes the first Argentine to score points since Carlos Reutemann in 1982. And Rosanna, you know, now he is being touted as a possible driver alongside Nico Hülkenberg in the Sauber team next year. That's still one of the remaining seats on offer. So from almost out of a middling Formula 2 season, Colapinto is now a firm favourite for an F1 seat almost next year full time.
Yeah, he's really put his name in lights, hasn't he? It's such an opportunity and he's made the most of it already. I hope I'm not giving him the sort of commentator's curse and he'll have a bad weekend this weekend. But I was talking to James Vowles actually on the way out here to Singapore. I say talking, it was actually through the means of a messaging device, because he's quite a little social media fiend, isn't he, James Vowles? I don't know if you've noticed that.
He loves a video.
Likes a little bit. Yeah, loves a little selfie here and there. And he'd put up a selfie of himself sort of nestled, I'm going to say, in his business, probably first class seat. And I messaged to say very similar setup for me back in 48J.
Were you serving the drinks?
I was on the drinks trolley. A fine career, it has to be said, being an air stewardess, but not when you're flying out to do a different job. So we were joking about that, and then I said, look, by the way, also I wasn't in Baku, congratulations, what a result. And he said, yeah, it's great, we needed it, and they need to keep scoring now. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? They need to keep that momentum up, because it's been obvious for quite some time that Alex Albon's capable of taking that car into the points-paying positions, but they need to keep it going. But you're right, Franco Colapinto, what an opportunity. He's got a real chance now for a full-time F1 seat, and who knows, maybe it will be the Sauber/Audi seat that he goes on to take. But I wonder if James Vowles is thinking, should have got Franco Colapinto in the seat instead of Carlos Sainz. Probably not, because of all the amazing racing history of Carlos Sainz and his pedigree, but quite a coup anyway. The Argentinians going wild, I think, at the moment for their guy to be racing on the grid. I've got a bit of a query, Mark. Lando Norris came into the pits just now, and I dutifully got out of the way thinking he was going to pull in and have something changed on the car, but he drove straight through. Is that because he was trying to transfer data? I mean, they can transfer data wherever, I'm imagining. Then I thought, maybe he's going to do a practice start, because as we know, starts have been a bit Don Carey for him this season. And he just carried on and went straight out onto the track. Then Oscar Piastri came out fairly shortly afterwards. So what are they doing? They're going to run Piastri behind Norris to learn something? Or what's the point of a run through the pit lane?
Hang on, here's Leclerc.
Well, that is very, very...
Copy.
That was Charles Leclerc saying that is a very, very blank lap, referring to, well, who was he referring to there then? Trying to see. Charles Leclerc currently down in 6th. Just getting another look at Valtteri Bottas getting caught up with traffic at the Red Bull emerging from the pit lane. So, more radio.
Blocked by the Red Bull. Yeah, I don't know what he was doing there.
Yeah, traffic management going to be an issue from FP1 all the way through. Charles Leclerc coming out of the final corner running wide, and I wonder if it was commenting on his own lap and how it wasn't actually really up to scratch as he comes sick. So he put in a 132.4. His teammate Carlos Sainz a 132.1, a thousandth off Lando Norris. Tsunoda within a tenth of both of them in third. Verstappen down in fourth. And actually, as I say that, Norris has just gone even quicker and found almost 3.5 tenths. And Piastri's flying now as well in his first lap on the soft tyre. Let's see what the Aussie has got. He goes up to 7th. So that's what's happening on these soft tyre runs at the moment. Back to you, Mark.
Well, so the first thing I was going to say was there is no real benefit here at this particular circuit, like there would have been and there was in Baku, of running your cars close to each other, because back there in Baku with a very, very long straight, you get the benefit of the slipstream, which can actually bring 2-3 tenths per lap if you manage to get that right. So really valuable. Here we don't have a circuit that's anything like that, and actually you'll end up in each other's way if you're close to each other. So I don't think that's the reason. You do, though, have to come in through the pit lane as part of your preparation. It's partly because you get the driver used to entering and exiting the pit lane, which of course is crucial. You don't want to lose any time as the weekend rolls into race situations. You don't want to lose time. Driver needs to know where the sort of speed limit lines are. They need to know where the pit stop box is. But normally to do that, you would pull into the pits and do a stop. But if they want to do another lap, you can get benefit from coming into the pit lane, understanding where that is, what the route is and out, where those speed limit lines are, both on the way in and on the way out as well. And also, he may want to sort of cool those tyres down and go for another run. So I suspect there's nothing too much more in it than that. I don't think it's about getting their drivers close to each other on track, because I can only think that would hinder them rather than help them.
23 minutes, 39, 38. 37 seconds remain of free practice one. Lando Norris is fastest with a 131.8 ahead of Carlos Sainz by 3 tenths of a second. Tsunoda in the RB is third. Verstappen and Albon within 6 tenths in the Williams in the top 5 ahead of Leclerc. Piastri, Colapinto is 8th ahead of Hamilton. Perez is 10th. Alonso, Russell, Magnussen. By the way, K-Mag's back as well after his one race ban. Ollie Behrman deputising, but Magnussen's back for the rest of the year, and he's currently 13th ahead of Bottas. Ricciardo is 15th. Joe, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Stroll and Gasly on a lap at the moment, 20th and last. So we'll see what they have got. I just want to go back and finish off the Williams Colapinto chat we were having, because as Rosanna kind of alluded to, with he being James Vowles' pick, not only for the seat, but also Vowles picked him to come into the Williams Academy. I think that's a huge vindication for what Vowles is setting up there at Williams with their own driver academy, trying to be more independent and stand alone, whereas before, we kind of half saw them as a bit of a Mercedes junior team, didn't we?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. He doesn't want them to ever be seen as a junior team. He wants them to be a standalone big outfit like they've been in the past. So much history and legacy at Williams in Formula One, massive amount of success. He wants to get them back to that, and they've been building things in the background, not just from a driver perspective, but clearly signing the likes of Carlos Sainz. They've been able to show Carlos Sainz there's something happening there that's worthy of him. And let's not forget, Sainz had a few bigger options than perhaps Williams on the table. There's something that's happening in the background that looks like a positive long-term future. I've spoken to a number of people in the team. They all say the same kind of thing. This year and the one that's gone before, it was all about building. It's about ripping things up, breaking things, finding out what works, what doesn't, and then putting the pieces in place that over 2 or 3 years are going to turn them into a front-running organisation. 2026, when this massive regulation change comes, is a huge opportunity for anybody who's in a good place to capitalise on it. So if Williams can spend 24 and 25 getting into that good place, 26 could be a real chance for them to get back towards the front.
It's going to be an exciting run to the end of the season for Williams in that fight. And actually, with Colapinto's great result, it got me thinking ahead of FP1. can you name some of the best mid-season driver swaps? And then a bonus if that driver went on to secure a full-time seat with any team the following year. Who comes to your mind there, Mark?
Well,
anybody in particular?
bear in mind, my memory's terrible, but I do know that most of them have all happened at Red Bull. So you're looking at Lawson has come in.
Yeah, very recently.
Could end up being a full-time seat.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the most likely. Albon got biffed. I'm trying to think who replaced him. I can't remember who was the driver coming in.
Well, there was a weird moment in time where you felt sorry for Daniel Kvyat, who had got biffed, then came back, then he got replaced by Brendan Hartley.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But Gasly was also on the fringes as well at one point.
Jaime Alguersuari.
Oh yes, he came in for, I want to say, Sebastian Bourdais.
Yeah.
Rosanna, you got any?
Nick De Vries?
Of course.
Yeah.
The Monza Williams. He got points as well, didn't he?
He got points, yeah.
Stoffel Van Dorn.
Stoffel, he
Bahrain.
stepped in for Fernando for one race, didn't he? And then did get a full-time seat off the back of it.
Hashtag BBC F1. If you've got any, let us know, and we'll try and get to them in these last 20 minutes or so. But I tell you what, you mentioned Daniel Ricciardo there. I think we can count him as well, because if memory serves me correctly, he came in midway through 2011 for HRT as Fernando Alonso almost loses the Aston Martin on the curbs on the exit. I think it was turn 8, yes, turn 7 on the way to turn 8. We saw Lando Norris have a moment there on his first lap on the soft tyre, and you just get pitched up on the curbs there. You get raised, and then as you apply the throttle, that car just kicking out at the rear.
I mean, his car must have been at almost 90 degrees to his direction of travel at one point. Massive, but of course it was Fernando. The experience of Fernando allowed him to catch it. But yeah, a few people getting caught out on that same curve. It's just such quite a high curve that the car can bottom out, and once that happens, the rear wheels effectively lift off the ground. You've got no grip, no traction left.
Daniel Ricciardo currently down in 17th. Yuki Tsunoda currently up in 4th for RB, who are embroiled in a bit of a fight in the constructors with Williams and Haas, but RB have been a bit out of form compared to Haas and Williams over the last few races or so. But there has been increased pressure, which had kind of died down over the last few races, I thought, about the future of Daniel Ricciardo. It seems to have automatically been amped up ahead of this weekend. Liam Lawson, rumour has it he's expected to take a seat at RB. But when is the biggest question. Some think it's going to happen after this weekend. Some think it's 2025.
Well, yeah, you're right. The rumours have been building. It's looking more and more likely that for 25, he is the guy that's going to take that seat alongside Tsunoda. But just this week particularly, it's been ramping up, as you said, in the press. Even yesterday in the media day ahead of this weekend in Formula One, a lot of questions around it, and even some of the answers that came back. I mean, I heard people talking about Daniel Ricciardo almost as if, it was his last race. We're expecting an announcement. Even Daniel Ricciardo is expecting an announcement after this weekend about the future. But whether that is the future for 25 or from the immediate future, it would seem so harsh, wouldn't it, to end a guy's career at Singapore. I mean, a long career, and yes, he might be struggling for performance, but this is a guy that's done, I think, great things for Formula One, a very popular guy, and I know that this is, it's a performance-based industry, so from a team's perspective, I get it. You have to look at maximising the opportunity you've got. They're in a fight in the midfield, which is important to them, so I get all of that. But bringing a driver change in, bringing Lawson in at this point, which would almost certainly end the career of Daniel Ricciardo, seems incredibly harsh, as opposed to letting him see the season out, giving him a proper send-off and a big thank you, allowing him to do it almost on his own terms. That would seem like the more humane way to do it, but maybe it's not always how it works at Red Bull.
But I suppose, do you think the pressure in that battle in the constructors to score points when you can, but also the pressure that they've got? Oh, here's Alonso.
Just to check, Fernando, you pushed the pit button. Is that on purpose?
No, to avoid a crash with this car, I push the buttons. All of the ones I have.
That was Alonso. I think just after he had his little moment on the curbing, trying to slow himself down, and standing cool, calm and collected in the cockpit as ever. And Perez, just seeing a replay of him getting balked by some traffic and not happy about it. Q radio. I got blocked by Albon, is what he said. So that's going to be happening all throughout the practice sessions, and indeed qualifying Q1 is going to be tasty for that. Obviously, there's the fight in the constructors, which perhaps RB are thinking about, but also they have this brilliant young driver in Liam Lawson who showcased that he was good enough last year when he deputised for Daniel Ricciardo when he was out for his injury for a few races. So Lawson was really hounding Tsunoda and at times beating him. It's almost like they've got to do something with Lawson or risk losing him.
Yeah, and there could even be things buried in a contract which have dates by which if you don't use him, he's free to go elsewhere. So there could be that element that we're not aware of. But it just seems like we've just had a summer break a few weeks ago. There was lots of talk about the future of the whole Red Bull driver lineup and whether it would shift around. It almost feels like that might have been even a better time to do it, which seems weird because it's earlier. But we're now getting into the last section of this season, and to get rid of Daniel at this point seems harsh. But of course I get your point. Look, I've been in the Formula One team for many years. It is all about performance. It's all about maximising the job you can do with the car that you have. They will of course want to maximise the car they've got, and that's where the biggest increase in performance is going to come from. But if they don't feel they're getting enough out of Daniel Ricciardo consistently, giving him many chances, maybe then that's the way they're looking at it. Maybe they think they can get something better out of Liam Lawson, and if nothing else, it's prep for next year if he is indeed going to be the guy to take that full-time seat.
This sport can be so brutal, can't it, sometimes? But it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time we see these kind of things happen. But as we currently talk, no decisions being made, and Daniel Ricciardo himself saying to the media at the build-up to this weekend that the week after Singapore, we've got a little bit of a gap as well before we go to Austin, another sort of autumnal break. That will be the dates as to when there will be a decision made, whether that is Ricciardo losing his seat mid-season or indeed losing it at the end of the year. But Ricciardo, one of the drivers who was a mid-season replacement back in 2011 for the Hispania Racing team.
Oh wow!
If memory serves me correctly, and then Toro Rosso full-time from 2012. So that's one of our mid-season driver replacements who then went on to secure a full-time seat. Hashtag BBC F1.
Does Max Verstappen count?
No, because he was already at Toro Rosso, right?
Yeah, but he stepped up to Red Bull mid-season and then got a full-time drive at Red Bull. Surely the most successful of anyone who's ever done that.
Yes, I mean, technically true. I mean, I'll give you half a point. Because didn't Verstappen, it wasn't like it was one drive and then we'll see. It was a straight swap, wasn't it? Straight away.
Mid-season driver swap.
It was.
I think I'm right in saying that was your question, Harry. So,
Well, people have got in touch. And of course, we cannot bring this topic up without saying Michael Schumacher, 1991,
of course,
deputising at the Belgian Grand Prix for Jordan, and then finishing, then Benetton, and then coming back for the full season in 1992 with Benetton. So he is up there as well. Sebastian Vettel, according to Brandon, stepped in for Robert Kubica back in 2007.
Oh, he did.
And then got a full-time drive at Toro Rosso. And Michael Schumacher, Jordan says Charles. We've also got who else has said anything? More coming in. I've got one. Esteban Ocon, 2016, replaced Rio Haryanto at Manor.
Blimey,
and then went on to Force India the year after.
Good shout. Yeah, I've totally forgotten that.
There are more. Oh, producer Joe has just piped up in my ear and said Oliver Behrman.
Yeah.
I suppose actually before he got the Saudi Arabia Ferrari drive, he didn't have the Haas seat confirmed, did he, at that stage?
No.
So that counts. I'm allowing that as well. Hashtag BBC F1, keep them coming in. Oh, here's another one. As we're just listening to Yuki Tsunoda coming through turn 7 and finding himself behind an Aston Martin.
Of course, Stroll, man.
He said, of course, Stroll, man. That's Tsunoda then. Both going fairly slowly, and but then just getting slightly balked by Lance Stroll, who is now on a quick lap on the soft tyre. And Yuki Tsunoda, we talk about Yuki Tsunoda, a compatriot of his, Carl, has said Kamui Kobayashi. Back in 2009,
who did he replace?
Finished the season with Toyota. Oh, who did he replace? Now you're asking me. He finished the season with Toyota and then joined Sauber. So Toyota's drivers... Oh, didn't Timo Glock get injured? I want to say Timo Glock got injured.
I don't remember that.
I want to say it was, I'm sure somebody will correct me on this, but that's my gut instinct at the moment as I rapidly try and figure out what actually happened.
While you're
I'm being told it's correct. I'm being told it's correct. Okay. Lovely stuff. Keep them coming.
It's good though. I quite like this. It's good, mate. Yeah.
Hashtag BBC F1. Mid-season driver replacements who perform well, so well, they got a full-time seat the following year.
Very good. I'm still saying Max Verstappen counts. But anyway, in the meantime, Charles Leclerc has gone quicker than Lando Norris. First time it's happened so far this session, I think, certainly at the top. Only by 76 one-thousandths of a second, so not very much at all. But, and as I said, massive caveat with all of the lap times right now in this session. We're in the daylight here in FP1. The temperatures are very, very different to what we'll see as the weekend goes on. And the circuit is very green, i.e. these are the streets of Singapore. General road traffic running around them for most of the year. And then all of a sudden, this weekend, we get the Pirelli rubber. The soft tyres that are on the cars right now, laying down rubber all around the circuit, and in doing so, ramping up the grip levels. So these times will tumble, but at the moment it's Leclerc from Norris, from Sainz in the other Ferrari.
Worth mentioning, turns 3, 9, 10, 12, 14, 17, all resurfaced ahead of this weekend as well. So smoother tarmac, much greener to begin with, but then can become very, very grippy.
And you know, the other effect that often has, and this is the kind of detail levels that Formula One goes into, won't be quite so much of an issue on this weekend because the rest of the weekend will be running night, but those new tarmacked areas tend to be much darker tarmac, very black in colour, and what that does on a regular weekend is it absorbs the sun's rays much better or much more effectively than the lighter, older tarmac. So newly surfaced sections of the racetrack can be quite a difference in surface temperature to the older, lighter coloured sections, and that does impact how the tyres interact with them. So, as I say, it'll be effective in this session. As we get into the night time, as the weekend rolls on, less of an issue, but an interesting point nonetheless.
Yeah, we get large drops in track temperature as well between kind of all the sessions, so that tyre prep's so crucial, as you allude to. Also things like Hamilton.
Too much understeer.
Too much understeer for Lewis Hamilton on the radio as he continues to try and find some sort of sweet setup that can last him throughout the whole of a weekend. I'm sure we'll come on to that subject in a little bit, but 8 minutes and 50 seconds remain. Charles Leclerc is fastest ahead of Norris, Sainz, Verstappen, Tsunoda is 5th, Piastri, Ricciardo is 7th ahead of Albon, Alonso and Ocon round out the top 10. Then comes Colapinto ahead of Hamilton, who is 12th, Gasly, Perez, Stroll is 15th, then it's Russell, Magnussen is 17th ahead of the two Saubers, and Hulkenberg 20th and last. So it's the Hasses and the Saubers right at the back of the pack as it currently stands with just about 8.5 minutes left on the clock. Rosanna Tennant, hello.
Hello, I was just watching the Ferraris go out on the hard tyres, and Oscar Piastri's just come in on the soft tyres, and the mechanics are just sorting out his car.
He says he's touched the wall, apparently, Rosanna, on the radio.
Just having a quick look. They're having a look all around the car, just checking the right-hand side of it. Quite a few mechanics looking at the right rear tyre. Cameramen running over to get a look as well. Touching the rubber, having a little look. He's still got the engine going.
You can actually see, Rosanna, there is witness marks on the right front tyre where it's clearly scraped the concrete barriers, and the left rear as well. So, yeah, he's getting very, very close. I mean, that is where the lap time is, but it sent him back on his way again, so no major concerns.
Yeah, he's heading back out. He was so precise in Baku, wasn't he? But that's the difficulty of these street circuits. They bite if you get too close, but you've got to be millimetric with your precision to make sure that you don't end up properly in the wall. But a little kiss here or there, maybe that's quite nice. I was just going to say, with these driver switches mid-season, Daniel Ricciardo himself, 2023, of course, came back in for the Hungarian Grand Prix last year, replacing Nick de Vries, and then he was then replaced by Liam Lawson when he broke his hand in Holland.
Replacements who were replaced.
I know, that's a whole nother topic.
That's a very good one. Luca Badoer. There you go. There's one for you.
Harry.
Sorry. I'm liking this too much.
Oh, Pedro de la Rosa, I've got a feeling, stepped in for us at McLaren when Montoya left.
Yes.
But was he then?
06?
Was he then replaced again by Alex Burks in the same season? Or did they just share it? I can't remember.
Well, he lost the seat to Hamilton,
at the end of the season. But I think in that season, I think we might have had 3 drivers that season.
Oh, we've had a couple more come in as well. Damon Hill replaced Giovanni Amati at Brabham in 1992 and went on to a full-time Williams drive in 1993. So there's another one for you. And Robert Kubica was a mid-season replacement 2006 for Jacques Villeneuve at Sauber.
Okay, goodness me, that's a good one.
Have that one and double check it.
Andrew Benson has just been telling me in my ear that actually it wasn't 2006 and it was earlier. I think it was Wirtz and Pedro de la Rosa at McLaren that swapped places with each other. Maybe 2004, can't remember.
And then De La Rosa came back, didn't he, in 2011 to replace Sergio Perez? Because Perez had that big crash in Monaco. And I think he got concussion from it. That ruled him out for a few rounds, and then I believe De La Rosa came back. But that, I don't think that does not count in my questioning. But I'm loving these. Keep them coming in if there are any more.
David Coulthard.
Yes, David Coulthard.
Yeah. Sad the way he entered the sport, of course, but went on to have a good career.
Indeed. Just seeing I'm having a scan of hashtag BBCF1, so if anybody has any more, keep them coming in. And indeed, replacements who replaced that. Well, that's a whole nother. Maybe we should save that for FP2. Luca Badoer replaced Felipe Massa, who was injured, 09, and then Badoer was replaced that same year by Giancarlo Fisichella.
True, yeah, remember that.
God, this sport, it just goes crazy, doesn't it? Right, let's get back to the track action, but we'll keep reading them out. Hashtag BBCF1 if you've got any more for us. 4 minutes and 40 seconds remain. Leclerc fast as ahead of Norris, Sainz, Verstappen and Tsunoda currently the top 5. Kevin Magnussen's back.
Isn't he just?
He's down in 17th. Teammate Hulkenberg is 20th. Of course, Behrman managed to nick a point in that car last time around. But Magnussen's back with a clean licence.
Which he mentioned in the press conference yesterday, or in the media day rather yesterday, that's a slightly odd situation, right? He got banned for, you know, what you might describe as sort of chaotic or even dangerous driving, as it was seen. He's now got 0 points. He can drive however he likes, because unless he does something really stupid, he's got a bit of a free pass now for a few races with a completely clean licence. So it was just questioning how the system, it seemed very harsh the way he was banned anyway, and I'm sure everyone's got their own opinions on that. It wasn't just about the one incident, of course, that got him the final 3 points, but questions about whether this system needs reviewing and having another look at. And I think it is being in the background. There is a group of people now having a look at that at the FIA and working out if there might be a better way to make this play out. We want to keep racing safe. We need to make sure that driving standards are upheld. But there's always going to be a fine line between pushing the limits and going beyond them.
Yeah, it certainly is. But Magnussen then was rather amusing in his answers, it has to be said, some of his answers about the havoc he could potentially cause in these final races. We don't really expect to see Kevin Magnussen back at the end of the year, so it will be a bit of a swan song these last 7 races for Kevin Magnussen. But again, it comes back to that tight fight between Haas. Well, it's RB who actually lead the way in 6th in the Constructors. They're only 5 points clear of Haas, who are only themselves 13 points ahead of Williams. And then actually, Williams jumped Alpine last time out, but the difference is only 3 points between them. And all it takes is an absolutely crazy race for Sauber to get a 5th place, and suddenly they're ahead of all of them. But Sauber's still plumb last with 0 points and well off the pack. Hamilton Radio.
I'm trying to reduce this traction metrics. You guys got to fix it, and I'll be in as soft as I can.
Yeah, sure thing, Lewis. We'll have a look after the session.
I'm trying to reduce the traction metrics. What is he on about there, Mark? Any ideas?
Sorry, do you know what? I'll be totally open here. I was reading a message from Andrew Benson at the time.
Unbelievable.
Because he's still going on about Pedro de la Rosa and Alex Wirtz. And he's right. I still got the dates wrong. It was 2005.
No. If anyone's going to pull you up on that, it's Andrew Benson.
I know.
I'm surprised I've not been pulled up on anything I've said yet. Traction metrics for Lewis Hamilton. Oh, let's hear Perez first.
Yeah, I can stop the car with the front right.
Copy.
I can't stop the car with the front right. So Perez having brake issues?
Yeah, sounds like it. Traction metrics from Lewis's point of view, this is a very sort of traction-heavy circuit. And what we mean by that is there are a lot of slow corners, a lot of kind of right-angle corners where there's big braking zones, and then off the back of that, where you've slowed the car down to a very slow speed, you want to get back on the throttle as early as possible and, of course, power down the next straight. That requires massive amounts of traction, i.e. the rear wheels gripping and allowing you to put that power down. Now, over the course of FP1 and these practice sessions, you're gradually learning with the tools on the car how you can best deliver the power from the power unit via the power train and the drivetrain, and then down onto the racetrack via the rubber and that contact patch. So the traction metrics are going to be some of the measurable data points that they'll be looking at as to how much traction they have, how easy it is to deliver that power, whether certain settings on the steering wheel that can affect that are effective or not, and he'll be looking at all of those things. So I suspect that's what they're trying to understand and learn right now.
Just seeing a replay of Perez indeed locking up as he comes over the Anderson Bridge and brakes for the left-hander, trying to get it into 13, locking up that front right. As Zhou Guanyu has a little moment in the Sauber and takes the runoff down at turn 1, and you have to make sure you follow the arrows there and stay right and rejoin on the exit of turn 2 as you feed back through into 3. But Zhou Guanyu following the rules there. Rosanna.
We were hearing from Sergio Perez just then, weren't we, on the radio, talking about braking, and he's been complaining about that throughout the session. About sort of almost 20 minutes ago, he was on the radio to his engineer saying that when he was starting to brake, the car was pitching. I don't want to get too technical, Mark, but you've got pitching, you've got yawing, am I right? Yeah. And does this all suggest that Red Bull are going to be really struggling with the bounciness of the track this weekend, and when it comes to car manoeuvrability through the corners?
Well, pitching is this sort of nose diving, so the car pitching forward, all of the weight transferring to the front axle, which happens anyway. That's literally a feature of physics when you jump on the brakes at the end of a straight. But the modern Formula One cars are very, very stiffly run in general. That allows you to keep a nice stable aerodynamics platform and get the most out of the aero on the car. But on a circuit like this, and this has been one of Red Bull's biggest problems, where you need to soften things off just to account for the very bumpy nature of the racetrack, maybe the higher curbs as well to allow it to ride those, that's when Red Bull have really struggled. So what you want is this very stiff and stable, solid car, but on a circuit like this, you also need it to be able to manage the bump. So Red Bull are probably trying to find the sweet spot between that. It's always been a bit of an Achilles heel in recent times for them. So yeah, pitching is this lurching forwards. You feel it in your road car as you're coming up to a roundabout quite fast. Everything sort of wants to push forward with inertia, and all of the weight transfers to the front. The front pitches down, the ride height lowers, you might start to bottom out as well.
Checking flag. And before you know it, that is the end of free practice 1 as the sun slowly starts to set in the skies in Singapore above the Marina Bay Street Circuit. FP2 will indeed be under the lights, but this session, although slightly more unrepresentative, the track evolving constantly as the lights around this circuit will get switched on as we head into the night time for free practice 2. This is how FP1 has ended up. Charles Leclerc fastest for Ferrari on the soft tyre with a 1:31.7, just over half a tenth of a second between himself and Lando Norris. Carlos Sainz making it a Ferrari 1-3. Verstappen about 3/10 off down in 4th. Good opening session from Yuki Tsunoda in 5th, half a second off in the top 5, ahead of Piastri with a delayed start and contact with the wall throughout that session. He is the car not too badly damaged. Ricciardo 7th, Albon 8th, Alonso and Ocon the top 10. Franco Colapinto 11th, ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Then comes Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll down in 15th, ahead of Russell. Then comes Magnussen, Bottas, Joe 19th and Nico Hulkenberg 20th. And I'll leave you with this, Rosanna Tennant. Bruno Senna, mid-season replacement 2011 for Nick Heidfeld at Lotus Renault, went on to Williams.
We need to sort out the brakes. It cannot be that we change the brake balance so much.
We need to sort out the brakes. It cannot be that we change the brake balance so much. So Sainz not happy with his brake setup at the moment. That's what I'll leave you with, Rosanna.
Thank you very much. Any more radio? Hey, well, it's a little bit noisy, as you can hear down here, because the drivers are now queuing up to do their practice starts. Of course, a very important part of Sunday's Grand Prix. Track position here is king. You want to qualify as far up as you can, and you want to stay out of trouble off the start. So off they go, practicing their starts. So Charles Leclerc fastest, guys. We said at the beginning of the show that we thought Ferrari were the favourites coming into this weekend, but it's not a representative set do we read into that performance, Mark? Leclerc ahead of Norris.
Yeah, well, the usual candidates, I guess, in the most part, are up there or thereabouts. So the two Ferraris are there, Lando Norris is there, Piastri's more or less there, although he had that issue by touching the wall, had to come in. Even Max Verstappen up there in P4, although he is about 3/10, I think, behind the leaders. So as I said, the bit of a caveat with all the lap times right now, but I think we can't take too much in terms of overall performance. The teams will take a lot individually out of all this, and we've had a lot of talk about brakes needing adjusting or settings needed changing. That was the point of this session. Hopefully next time out in FP2 a little bit later on, everything will be a little bit more fine-tuned for everyone.
A bit of work to do for the teams and drivers between the FP1 session and the FP2 session. Harry, were you surprised then? But you were thinking Charles Leclerc and Ferrari were the ones to watch, surely, this weekend?
I think so. I think we're still in that era of Ferrari strong tracks here, and there's quite a lot of corners obviously around this track. I think Ferrari are going well. They have been sorting out these bouncing issues that they have had, but wouldn't really reveal themselves too much here. Leclerc has a bit of a penchant for street circuits anyway. We know how well Sainz came last year in Singapore. It's just got a bit of a Ferrari feel about it, but I think it's going to be really tight. I think we're going to have a proper battle between Ferrari and McLaren. But you know what, Max Verstappen, I know it's FP1, but he wasn't that far behind.
Ooh, I'm just watching the Sauber mechanics running up the pit lane as a few F1 cars come down here. Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly past the mechanics. They were running up to get their driver who's been called to the weighbridge. So still plenty of activity going on here as teams practice some pit stops as well. The Mercedes mechanics are getting ready to do a practice pit stop for one of their drivers who's coming in now, and it's Lewis Hamilton. So they're going to set and we are going to leave you there. That is the end of FP1. As you know, Charles Leclerc fastest Ferrari. Between FP1 and FP2, you might like to check out our preview podcast, the Checkered Flag podcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, on BBC Sounds, of course, as well, and your smart speaker of choice. We preview the weekend with Andrew Benson, the BBC's F1 correspondent, and Autosports Motorsport editor-in-chief Rebecca Clancy. They both joined me yesterday to look ahead to the weekend. Plenty to talk about in that podcast. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be back for FP2 at 5 to 2, and we'll be on BBC 5 Sports Extra for that. My thanks to Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin. I've been Rosanna Tennant, and this has been an IC production for BBC Radio 5 Live.